This list is going to focus on the American Revolution. We will look at why the colonists broke away from England, the American Revolution itself, and the Founding Fathers as they created a new government. So we remember from previous lessons that the colonists were ruled pretty loosely by England. England's practice of salutary neglect allowed the colonists a great amount of freedom. They had their own legislators, they did their own taxing. However, after the 7 Years' War, England had acquired a lot of debt. So England's going to do what every country does when it needs money. It raises taxes. The colonists are going to object to this because they don't have representatives in England. That's where you get that famous saying, no taxation without representation. But the king continues to place taxes on the colonies. The Stamp Act placed taxes on every piece of paper in the colonies, the Tea Act, and of course they're English and they love their tea, so they put more heavy taxes on tea. This is, of course, going to cause that famous Boston Tea Party where they dress up like Indians and they throw the tea into the Boston Harbor. This is going to cause millions of dollars in damage to the shipping companies and to England. The Boston Tea Party was a big deal because it cost them a lot of money, and England is not going to tolerate these colonists just being insubordinate, especially when it's going to cost them money because they're raising taxes to collect money. In retaliation, the king passed the Boston Port Act, and that's going to close the Port of Boston to trade. Suddenly, people are without work. Nothing is coming in, nothing is going out of the Port of Boston. The king had to send soldiers in to enforce all these taxes. And these soldiers are going to have to be housed. The people were forced to take in the soldiers, and that's where we get the Quartering Act. So you see, tensions are running pretty high between the colonists and the English, all because of these taxes and these soldiers running around in the colonies enforcing those taxes. And that's where we're going to get the start of the American Revolution. With troops stationed in houses, trying to keep the peace, you're going to have the Boston Massacre occur. It's when armed soldiers are going to fire into a crowd, killing 3 and wounding 8. The first shots of the war are actually the battles of Lexington and Concord. This is where we get the shot heard around the world. These are militia fighting an army of England. We have not declared war yet. The colonists are still sort of trying to reach an agreement with England to alleviate some of these heavy taxes. So to do this, each colony sent representatives to Pennsylvania to work out and negotiate with Great Britain on taxes and trade and representation. This is the First Continental Congress. The Second Continental Congress meets, and the fighting between the militia and the English has intensified. This is where we're going to get General George Washington elected as the leader of the Continental Army. Negotiations with England are not working, and the long debates are going to begin on breaking away from England. A committee is formed, and Thomas Jefferson is elected to write the Declaration of Independence. So the war is now official as the delegates sign their names to the document breaking away from English rule. This is going to happen at the Second Continental Congress. The Continental Congress is America's first governing body, and out of that body emerges many great men who are going to shape American government. And we call these men our Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers are men who either had something to do with the American Revolution and then the Declaration of Independence, or later had something to do with the creation of the Constitution. That's what makes a Founding Father. So we're going to look at some of these Founding Fathers. Benjamin Franklin was a member of the Continental Congress, and he signed the Declaration of Independence. His wisdom and advice is going to sort of temper the younger members of Congress because he's going to be the oldest member. He's also going to be instrumental in France as a diplomat and getting France to support the American Revolution and our quest for independence. You should be pretty familiar with George Washington. It's whose great leadership as a general and a commander-in-chief of the colonial army. This won him such great respect that there was no one else even considered for being America's first president. He served 2 terms, 8 years. This is going to set a precedent that presidents should only serve 8 years. This is not going to be broken until FDR. In his farewell address, Washington's going to warn the young nation of 2 things: to stay away from Europe, that America is a young nation and it needs to establish itself at home, and it did not need to be dragged into European wars. He's also going to warn against political parties. We're going to see that neither one of these 2 things lasted very long. John Adams. John Adams was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, but he spent most of the American Revolution in France, trying to get France to help the colonies. Again, to gain independence, we needed help, we needed money, we needed help from other countries to fight this big nation, to fight England. When he returned to America, he was George Washington's vice president. He did not particularly like being vice president. He said, my country has, in its wisdom, contrived for me the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived or his imagination conceived. So basically saying he thought the job of vice president very, very boring. As much as Washington might have wanted a nation where everyone got along and there were no political parties, that's not going to be. Politics and a 2-party system is going to develop very quickly. The Founding Fathers believed very strongly in America, but what that America would look like and how the government would function was hotly contested. The most famous rivalry is actually going to be between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, 2 founding fathers. John Adams was a staunch Federalist who believed in a strong federal government, while Jefferson and what's going to become known as the Democratic Republicans were for looser government and state governments. This argument over federal and state power is going to continue. We're going to see that even in the Civil War and later. So John Adams is most famous for keeping America out of war with France. He's sort of going to take that Washington stance of staying out of war, and the first test of that is going to be with France. America owed money to France for its help in the American Revolution. After France overthrew its own monarchy, America decided that we didn't need to repay France because we didn't owe money to this new government. We owed it to the previous government. You can imagine that didn't go over very well with France, and that's going to lead to that quasi-war, the XYZ affair, and of course the very unpopular Alien and Sedition Acts, which we talk about in other lessons. However, John Adams, the second president, through all of this with France, is going to build up the military, and he's also considered the founder of the Navy. Thomas Jefferson. He's a founding father, and he did an amazing thing in writing the Declaration of Independence. So he's the father of the Declaration of Independence. He's going to negotiate the Louisiana Purchase. That's going to double the size of the United States. If you think that presidential elections are nasty now, they were just the same at the very beginning of American history. The presidential election of 1800 was between Jefferson and Adams, and it's sometimes called the Revolution of 1800, and it was really ugly, with Jefferson and Adams running fierce campaigns against each other, slandering each other, telling lies about each other. They really believed that the other person's policies were going to ruin this new nation, and they were very adamant that their views were the only way to have America proceed. America had not had many elections yet, so at this point there is not a separate ballot for vice president. The presidential candidate Jefferson is going to end up tied with the vice president Aaron Burr. The vote for president was decided actually by the House of Representatives. Now this election is significant because it shows that America can successfully transfer power from one party to another. a lot of times in nations, if there's a party in power and another party wants to take power, it can often involve a civil war or the nation falls apart. But in America, it didn't happen. And that's why it's so significant. So Adams, who is a Federalist, is going to lose to Jefferson in this very hotly contested election of 1800, and power is going to smoothly transition to Jefferson and a different party. And that's what makes it so amazing. So the Federalists are out, and the Democratic Republicans are in. And we're going to get a different founding father. Now, Alexander Hamilton never became president, but you want to remember him because he is a founding father, and he did establish the bank. The Articles of the Confederation were the first Constitution of the United States. However, they didn't provide for a strong central government, and the states are going to act more like city-states. Alexander Hamilton was a member of the Federalist Party and wanted a strong central government to facilitate trade and to create a stronger nation. And he also believed that the only way for America to be great was to have a national bank for trade. So that's why he is considered the founder of the National Bank, and his face appears on the $10 bill. Alexander Hamilton may have believed that he would become president one day, but the Federalist Party split, and Democratic Republicans are going to take office with Jefferson. And in a dramatic turn of events, Hamilton was actually killed in a duel with Aaron Burr. And Aaron Burr was Jefferson's vice president. So he never actually made it to become president. James Madison is the last president who was also a founding father. He, along with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, are considered the authors of the Constitution. Because remember, a founding father could be involved in the Continental Congress and the American Revolution, or involved in the creation of the Constitution. Those are the two criteria. James Madison also wrote what's called the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers are a series of articles and essays written to show why we need a Constitution and the importance of the Constitution. You can sort of see the Federalist Papers as a companion to the Constitution. For example, in Federalist number 10, so like there's all these different papers, and the 10th paper written. So Federalist number 10, Madison is going to discuss how the Constitution will prevent a rule by factions and by majorities, and he's going to explain how the Constitution will create a republic, something very essential in the Constitution. In Federalist Paper number 51, he's going to discuss how checks and balances work. He also drafted the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights. So he's also considered the father of the Bill of Rights. So remember how at the end of Washington's presidency, he advised not to get involved in European affairs? Here's a good reason why. Europe, especially Great Britain and France, have a tendency to go to war with each other. Great Britain and France were at war with each other again. This is the Napoleonic Wars. During this war with France, Great Britain began putting severe trade restrictions on America so that America couldn't trade with France. Of course, America's not going to like that. Great Britain also began seizing American sailors and making them fight for Great Britain against France. So going onto ships, taking them, making them fight for Great Britain. Great Britain also began supporting American Indian tribes to prevent America from expanding west. So we're getting into this conflict with Great Britain pretty early after the American Revolution. And that's why this is often seen as America's second war of independence. So with all of these things adding up, we're going to declare war on Great Britain. The war lasted about 2.5 years. The highlights of the war are, 1, most of the fighting was at sea. However, there are a few battles in America, and the British actually did make it all the way to Washington, D.C., and they burned the Capitol. And this is where we get the story of Dolly Madison heroically running into the burning Capitol and saving the portrait of George Washington from being burned. This is also the war where we get our national anthem. Victories over invading British armies at the Battle of Baltimore is where Francis Scott Key is going to be inspired to write the Star-Spangled Banner. If the American Revolution gave us our first set of presidents, the War of 1812, also known as the Second American Revolution, is going to give us a second wave of presidents. Andrew Jackson, John Tyler, Zachary Taylor, all of these men are going to serve in the War of 1812. So that's going to round out our founding fathers. So you need to know who they were and what they did, because these great men are going to be the foundation of everything to come in America. After the War of 1812, with Andrew Jackson, John Tyler, this is going to be a relative time of peace. So America can start expanding west, and we can sort of solidify ourselves as a nation. And so this time period between the end of the War of 1812, almost up till the Civil War, is dubbed or named the era of good feeling. Please take a moment to read the Declaration of Independence. There is a link in your lesson that has it being read by very famous actors and actresses, so take a look at that. You need to be familiar with what the Declaration of Independence said and what it does. Of course, the Declaration of Independence very clearly is when we declared our independence from Britain. However, don't get that confused with the Constitution or the Articles of the Confederation or the Bill of Rights. These are all separate documents that all did different things. So looking at the Declaration of Independence, you're going to have this beginning section. The beginning section also will show up on tests sometimes, so make sure that either you memorize it or you have a pretty firm understanding so that if you see it, you recognize, oh, that comes from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted by men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That section right there also appears on tests, because remember, we've talked about John Locke and his idea of natural rights and the social contract theory. So those, it's really important that you recognize that portion of the Declaration of Independence is talking about natural rights, things that you were born with, and that the government doesn't come from kings and it's just inherited, but it comes from the people. And if the people don't like it, they have the right to rebel, and that's what America's doing. We're rebelling. So make sure you're familiar with that portion of the Declaration of Independence. Another portion of the Declaration of Independence you need to be familiar with is the grievance section. And the grievance section is basically just Jefferson listing, this is what you did, King George, this is why we don't like it. So things like the Stamp Act, the Quartering Act, the Boston Poor Act. He's just laying it out there and saying, this is what you did. So, for example, he has kept among us in the times of peace standing armies without consent of our legislatures. The Quartering Act, right? So make sure that you do realize there is a grievance section of the Declaration of Independence. Please take a moment to look at that link on the Declaration of Independence and understand its great importance in separating us from England and creating our new nation.